I never thought much about the choices I made when it came to family. Life, for the most part, had been predictable. I had settled into a routine: work, dinner, a few quiet evenings at home with my husband, and then sleep. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable. There were no surprises, no wild moments. Everything was in its place. But sometimes, comfort can be a double-edged sword, hiding the things we don't want to face or acknowledge. It was a rainy evening when it happened. The kind of rain that pours relentlessly, making everything outside look blurry, soft, and almost dreamlike. I was standing by the kitchen window, watching the drops race down the glass, the smell of wet earth filling the air. I felt restless, like something was on the verge of changing, but I couldn't pinpoint what. It was a nagging feeling, one that stayed with me, tugging at my thoughts, as if life was quietly preparing to turn a page without asking for my permission. My stepson, Dylan, had been unusually quiet for the past few days. I had noticed it, how he'd withdrawn into himself, barely speaking at the dinner table, always retreating to his room after school. He wasn't the same carefree boy I'd seen when he first came into my life. I didn't know if it was his age or something deeper, but it worried me. We hadn't always had the closest bond, but I still cared for him. Maybe more than I realized. That evening, after I finished dinner, I found myself walking down the hallway towards his room, a faint sense of curiosity bubbling up inside me. I knocked, but there was no answer. The door was ajar, just a crack. A bit hesitant, I pushed it open. And then I saw him. Dylan was standing there, holding something in his hands, a small, old book. It wasn't anything particularly extraordinary, but the way he was clutching it so tightly, almost as if it were a lifeline, made my heart skip a beat. His back was turned to me, and I could see his shoulders tense, like he was aware of my presence but didn't want to acknowledge it. For a moment, I stood there, frozen. I could have walked away. I could have pretended I hadn't seen anything out of the ordinary, but something stopped me. Something inside me, maybe curiosity, maybe concern, made me take a step closer. "Dylan," I spoke softly, unsure of what I was about to find. He flinched at the sound of my voice, then quickly turned around, the book hidden behind his back. I didn't hear you come in," he stammered, a little too quickly. I could sense the tension in the air, thick and palpable. There was something hidden in his eyes, a flicker of fear, maybe even guilt. I wasn't sure what it was, but it made my pulse quicken. I knew that look. It was the same look I had seen on my own face at different points in my life, when I was trying to hide something, trying to keep something buried, hoping no one would notice. But I noticed, and I could feel the pull to know more, to understand why he was acting this way. "I didn't mean to intrude," I said, trying to sound calm, "but you've been distant lately. I just wanted to make sure you're okay." His expression softened slightly, but the book was still clutched tightly in his hands. He wasn't ready to let go of whatever it was he was hiding. "I'm fine," he replied, his voice quieter now. "Really, just a lot on my mind." I wanted to believe him. I wanted to accept his answer and walk away, but that feeling in my chest, the one I couldn't shake, kept nagging at me. It was as though a part of me was telling me that there was more to this story. I didn't know why, but I couldn't just leave him to figure it out alone. And so, I did something unexpected. I took a step forward, my gaze never leaving him, and softly said, "If you want to talk about it, I'm here. You don't have to go through whatever this is alone." For a long moment, we just stood there, the silence between us heavier than anything I had felt in years. He didn't respond at first, but then slowly, almost reluctantly, he lowered the book and held it out to me. Maybe you can help," he whispered. I didn't know what I was getting myself into. But in that moment, it didn't matter. All I could feel was a strange, inexplicable pull to help him, to guide him, to somehow be a part of whatever journey he was on. And I decided, then and there, that I would. But little did I know, this would be the start of something that would change everything. I hadn't expected it to be so difficult to hold on to the sense of calm I'd tried so hard to maintain. Dylan handed me the book, but I didn't open it right away. Instead, I studied him. His face, his eyes, the way his hand trembled ever so slightly, betraying the mask of composure he was trying to hold up. I could see the walls he had built around himself, but there was something softer in the way he looked at me now. Maybe it was trust, or maybe it was just desperation. Either way, I had the feeling that I was about to be drawn into a world I knew nothing about. "I didn't mean for anyone to see it," Dylan whispered, his voice breaking the silence between us. I nodded, my heart pounding harder. I didn't know what he was referring to, but I was beginning to feel a gnawing curiosity mixed with a deep, unsettling sense of responsibility. I glanced down at the book, now resting in my hands, and hesitated before I opened it. It wasn't anything special at first glance, just an old, leather-bound volume with faded pages, yellowed by time. But there was something about it that screamed of secrets. I didn't know why, but I felt the urge to know everything. "What is this?" I asked gently, trying not to overwhelm him with too many questions at once. Dylan shifted uncomfortably, his gaze darting to the floor and then back up to me. It's a journal. I've been writing in it." I frowned slightly, my mind racing. A journal? I knew better than to think a teenage boy would keep something so innocent to himself. There was something deeper, something hidden between the lines. "Why?" I pressed, softly but insistently. "What's in here that you couldn't tell anyone?" He let out a slow breath and finally, as though he had no other choice, he sat down on the edge of his bed. "It's about me. About things I don't want anyone to know. About how I feel, how I've been feeling lately." His voice trailed off, almost as if the words themselves weighed him down. I sat next to him, keeping some distance between us, just enough to respect his space, but close enough to show I wasn't backing away. My mind was still working to piece together the situation, but the more I looked at him, the more I realized how much he needed someone, anyone, who wouldn't judge him. "Dylan," I began softly, "you don't have to go through this alone. We all have things we're ashamed of, things we're afraid to talk about." His eyes flickered with something I couldn't quite place, a mixture of confusion, frustration, and maybe even a little hope. "But you wouldn't understand." "I might not," I said, my voice steady but with an undertone of understanding. "But I want to. And I promise you, whatever this is, we can figure it out together." There was a long pause. Then, with a sudden shift in the air between us, Dylan opened up. Slowly, he began to tell me what was written in the journal. It wasn't anything extraordinary at first, just the struggles of being a teenager, the pressures of school, and the emotional distance he felt from everyone around him. But then, as he continued, the details grew darker. He had been feeling an intense emotional pull to something or someone that he didn't fully understand. He was caught in an emotional whirlwind, and the lines between right and wrong seemed to blur. The journal was his way of trying to make sense of it all, but even he wasn't sure what it meant. The words spilled out, and with them, the weight that had been pressing down on both of us. I could feel his struggle, how deeply he was torn between his desires and the responsibility that life had placed on him. There was no easy answer to what he was going through, no simple fix. But I could see his desperation, his longing to be understood, to be seen. As he finished speaking, a heavy silence enveloped the room. I didn't know what to say at first. There was so much I wanted to say, so many comforting words that felt inadequate in the face of his turmoil. But instead of speaking, I reached out, placing my hand gently on his arm. "I'm here for you," I said, my voice soft but unwavering. "And you don't have to hide who you are from me." For a moment, Dylan didn't move. Then, slowly, his shoulders seemed to relax, the tension finally lifting. The weight in the room shifted, and I realized this wasn't just about helping him with whatever he was struggling with. It was about being there for him, about helping him see that no matter how dark things seemed, he wasn't alone. And that, in itself, was enough to start making a difference. But even as I comforted him, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That this moment, this decision to help him, would change both of us in ways we couldn't yet understand. As I sat beside him, I realized that no matter what came next, I had crossed a line. And while I didn't know where it would take us, I knew one thing for sure: things would never be the same. The quiet, predictable life I had once known was gone, swept away by the unexpected, the unexplained, and the undeniable pull of human connection. I only hoped I could help him through it. And in the process, maybe even help myself.